under your chairmanship, Mrs. Reardon. I'd also like to thank the Minister for being here to listen and respond to the debate and for being so open and accessible when I have previously contacted him about this issue. Now, I've applied for this important debate because unless either the Minister is able to come to our aid or the West Midlands Fire and Rescue Authority can be persuaded to reject the proposals being put to them by the West Midlands Fire Service, the fire service in my constituency is threatened with extremely deep cuts. Now, if I may offer just a brief summary of how we got to this point. In 2008, the West Midlands Fire Service conducted a comprehensive review into its operations in order to improve its effectiveness and to ensure that resources were best deployed to maximise the level of fire cover across the county. Now, the review recommended that a number of fire stations should be merged whilst maintaining the same number of fire engines and crews across the county in order to offer a more effective service. Among its proposals, the review recommended that the two fire stations located in my constituency, Halesowen Fire Station and Cradley Heath Fire Station, should be merged with a new fire station built at a suitable location between the two towns. The proposals were put out for consultation at the end of 2008, and a large number of responses were received from different sections of the community. Now, despite strong opposition to the proposals to replace the two existing fire stations with a new fire station, including a strong campaign mounted by the Fire Brigades Union and submissions from Labour-run Sandwell Council, the Fire Service decided to press ahead with the proposal, and the merger was agreed by the Fire Authority in February 2009. Although the Fire Service did not change its plans to merge the two fire stations, it did agree to modify its proposal in one important way following the consultation exercise. The review had originally proposed that instead of having one 24-hour pump located at each of the two fire stations, the newly merged fire station should have one 24-hour pump and one 12-hour pump. Following the consultation period, that proposal was changed and it was agreed that there should be two 24-hour pumps at the new fire station. This was the proposal that was agreed by the Fire Authority in February 2009. After the Fire Authority's decision, not much happened. In fact, with regards to the two fire stations in my constituency, nothing happened at all. Whilst the review's proposals were implemented in other parts of the West Midlands, the fire stations in Halesowen and Cradley Heath continued to operate as before. To all intents and purposes, it appeared that the proposal had, at the very least, been put on the back burner. Now, the first indication that the plans might be back on the table came when the Chief Fire Officer wrote to me last December to lobby me on the local government finance settlement, when he said, and I quote, "I will do everything possible in order not to close your local fire stations, but at this level of cuts, I see some closures as an inevitability." However, the first time that the proposal was publicly resurrected was not until this summer, when the West Midlands Fire Service announced that it would be pressing ahead with the decision to merge the two fire stations. However, when this was formally announced, it became clear that the Fire Service only intended to implement certain parts of the decision that had been agreed in February 2009. Whereas the 2009 decision explicitly stated that the two fire stations would be replaced by a new fire station that would be built between the two existing fire stations, the proposals that the Fire Service now intends to implement could see the fire stations replaced by a rented industrial unit somewhere in the area, or, as currently seems to be a favoured option, the merged fire station would actually just be Cradley Heath Fire Station. I hope that you will not feel me to be overly pedantic, Mrs. Reardon, if I suggest that closing one fire station and moving the service it provides to another fire station is a very different proposition to building a new fire station to cover both areas and locating it between the two towns. Now, back in 2009, the Fire Authority agreed with this distinction. In its response to the consultation, the Fire Authority dismissed suggestions that Cradley Heath could serve the whole area, saying, and I quote, "Cradley Heath Fire Station was built in 1942. It is a cramped, old-fashioned building with no training facilities, and it has been the intention to replace the station for some years. There will be significant costs if the authority attempts to maintain the station on the present site. The authority believes that the risks in the areas covered by the existing Cradley Heath and Halesowen fire stations will be better served by having a combined new fire station located between the two existing sites. That is as true now as it was in February 2009. Whilst the physical presence of a fire station in a town is of enormous emotional importance to local residents, and having a fire station locally does have a very significant practical benefits, I recognise that there is some truth in the argument used by the fire service that fire stations do not put out fires, firefighters do. That is why I am even more concerned that having agreed to preserve two 24-hour pumps in 2009, the West Midlands Fire Service is now proposing that this should be halved and the new, or maybe not so new, merged fire station would only have a single pump to serve the area. This clearly has grave implications for the level of fire cover that is available in my constituency. Unlike the 2008 review, these new proposals are not part of a comprehensive assessment of the needs of the county and how best to deploy resources to provide the best possible level of cover in all areas. This summer's proposals would only affect Halesowen and Cradley Heath, reducing the service in my constituency. Now, clearly, like all services, the West Midlands Fire Service has had to bear a share of the savings needed to reduce the deficit that the government inherited. Indeed, because the West Midlands Fire Service has set a much lower council tax precept than other parts of the country, the overall impact of the local government finance settlement is even greater in the West Midlands than it is in other metropolitan fire authorities. I would urge the Minister to bear this in mind when considering the settlement for future years to ensure that metropolitan fire authorities in general, and the West Midlands in particular, are not forced to make deeper savings than can possibly be afforded without significant frontline cuts. However, whilst there are significant financial pressures on the fire service, it does seem that Halesowen and Cradley Heath are being expected to carry a disproportionate share of the burden to produce the required savings. As I have said, my constituency is the only area in the county to face a reduction in the number of pumps through these proposals. As I explained earlier, the West Midlands Fire Authority recognised in 2009 that it was not appropriate to reduce the number of pumps covering the area from 2 to 1.5. But yet the fire service is now proposing that instead of sharing the burden across a number of stations, the number of pumps in my constituency should be cut from 2 to just 1. It would seem to be basic common sense, something for which my constituents pride themselves, that either the decision to preserve 2 full-time pumps in 2009 was extraordinarily wasteful, or, as local residents suspect, reducing cover to just 1 single pump represents a serious risk to the local community. Now, although the fire service points to a relatively low number of call-outs from the 2 current stations, the local community does not believe that their statistics tell the whole story. Halesowen Fire Station is very close to junction 3 of the M5. that station also helps to cover calls out to the motorway network. We saw again, with the weekend's tragic accident in Somerset, just how important it is that our motorways are properly covered by the fire service network. Halesowen town itself is also changing. The reduction in incidents in recent years is partly the result of effective fire prevention, but also partly due to a decline in local manufacturing industry. New growth in the town is changing this. Whilst the new hotel, supermarkets, fast food restaurants and petrol stations are a vital boost for the local economy, there is no doubting that they all potentially represent a greater demand for the local fire service that was not present when the review was conducted in 2008. It seems folly on the part of the West Midlands Fire Service to be proposing deep service cuts in Halesowen at exactly the time when demand could be about to rise. Whilst there was significant disquiet locally regarding the 2009 decision, at least a case could be made that it was being done to improve the quality and efficiency of the service. It was an argument that my predecessor as Member of Parliament for Halesowen and Rowley Regis broadly accepted. However, the new proposal to cut the number of fire stations and the number of fire engines can only possibly be seen as a reduction in service. Now, there is a great deal of opposition to the proposals in my constituency, bringing together an unlikely alliance of a Conservative Member of Parliament, all local political parties, and the Fire Brigades Union. The FBU have held a well-supported rally in the town centre, and the petitions against the proposals have now collected over 1,000 signatures between them. Now, as the Minister will know, under the Local Government Act and the Fire and Rescue Services Act, fire authorities and best value authorities...
Order, order. The sitting is now suspended for 10 minutes until 4:52. Order. Sitting is resumed. James Morris.
Thank you. As I was saying, Mrs. Reardon, under the Local Government Act and the Fire and Rescue Services Act, fire authorities, as best value authorities, have a responsibility to consult the public effectively. They must also ensure that consultations comply with guidance from the Secretary of State. Now, this week's court decision on the Royal Brompton Hospital serves as a reminder of the importance of ensuring that public consultations, particularly on service closures, must be conducted effectively and fairly. Now, when the new proposals were announced in the summer, the West Midlands Fire Service said that as the decision to merge the fire stations had already been agreed, it was only necessary to consult on the staffing changes. Now, I know the Minister has extensive experience of local government and knows how a competent consultation process should be conducted. It would be questionable as to whether a 3-year-old consultation exercise holds much value under the best of circumstances. However, it surely cannot be right to claim that a decision taken on the basis of a 3-year-old consultation process remains valid, but then choose to selectively implement only parts of that decision. Now, either the 2009 decision should have been implemented in its entirety, or there should be a new, comprehensive review of the fire service's operations so that a proper judgment can be reached as to how resources should be allocated in order that the service complies with its obligations under the national framework. We now find ourselves in a position where even the Chief Fire Officer himself accepts that the consultation has, and I quote, not been ideal. But for parliamentary protocols, Mrs. Reardon, I would be tempted to use somewhat stronger words. There is a very real threat that unless the Minister is able to intervene, or the Fire Authority recognises that the proposals before them have not been properly thought through, my constituents will find themselves with a much reduced service that is radically different to anything that they have been consulted upon and that represents a significant risk to the community. So in conclusion, Mrs. Reardon, I would like to ask 3 questions of the Minister. Firstly, is he able to provide detailed assurances that the process followed by the West Midlands Fire Service is consistent with its statutory obligations to consult and to minimise risk? Secondly, will he work with the Secretary of State to draw up clear best practice guidance for the minimum standards required of fire authorities' consultation procedures? And finally, Mrs. Reardon, given the shortcomings in the way that the fire service has consulted with the public and other stakeholders, shortcomings that have been recognised by the Chief Fire Officer himself, does he agree with me that the best course of action would be for the West Midlands Fire Service to withdraw its proposals so that a full and comprehensive review can be conducted into how the service's resources can best be deployed to provide the fire cover that my residents require?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Reardon. I must say it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And may I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Halesowen and Rowley Regis, for securing this debate, and I'm very glad that he's done so. It's on an issue which I know he has taken a very considerable interest in and upon which he has been campaigning for some time. And I'm grateful to him for the care that he has taken in providing myself and my officials with information about this matter and for his concern for his constituents in the way he's sought a constructive meeting with me, which we had earlier on. I understand my honourable friend's concern about service provision in the West Midlands, because there's no doubt that fire stations provide a vital community and safety and protection service. Of course, the pump station in them are important too. Having run up the stairs to be back in time for this debate, I was reminded that they often carry defibrillators as well, because I thought I might be in need at one point. But joking apart, the fact is these are life-saving frontline services. And it's right that communities are sensitive as to their placement. Fire and rescue authorities have successfully improved the safety of their local communities over recent years. We've seen a fall in the number of fire deaths and indeed the number of fires. They have fallen. Fire deaths have halved in the last 20 years. So there's some real achievement out there. Against that background, and recognising the very strong commitment that my honourable friend has to his local service, I think we then have to step back a little bit and see what is the appropriate use of the Secretary of State's intervention powers and what are the appropriate means of dealing with the issues of controversy in this particular case. Because equally, the government is clearly, as its predecessor was, of the view that local services in relation to fire are best delivered locally. And the government's own commitment to localism reinforces that. That does involve decisions about a local deployment of services generally being taken at a local level. In the case of fire and rescue services, the democratically accountable fire and rescue service, rescue authorities, are the bodies charged with that responsibility. And those authorities are required by the national framework to produce and regulate an up-to-date integrated risk management plan. That has to be updated on a regular basis. It's called the IRMP. That identifies and assesses local need and sets out to mitigate effectively both existing and potential future risks to communities, because, of course, that can change with demographics and other matters. So, in fact, it's a very localist process that's built in at the moment with the IRMP. And each fire and rescue authority's IRMP should enable them to decide how best to provide their services, both prevention, protection, as well as the service provided by the stations and the placing of the pumps themselves. Those strategic and operational matters, manning and so on, hours of operation, and indeed a proper account of cross-border arrangements, all can and should be taken into account in considering the IRMP. And now, it's against that background, as I understand it, that the West Midlands Authority proposed to change the fire cover arrangements in Halesowen and Cradley Heath. And I'm advised that those proposals have been made in the light both of the assessed risk and the available resources. Now, that is a matter which is of local controversy, as my honourable friend fairly puts out, and I'm aware that a great deal of debate has been generated by these proposals. In one respect, it's a healthy one. The community are obviously concerned about it and are speaking up about it and are engaging with the Fire Authority, much assisted by the work of my honourable friend in that regard. I commend him for that. Equally, I understand that there are concerns about the adequacy and transparency of the consultation on its proposals. The question, though, is whether or not the concerns raised are such as to justify the use of the Secretary of State's intervention powers under Section 22 of the 2004 Fire Services Act. My honourable friend has recited the criticisms which are made of the consultation. That's to say the adequacy of an up-to-date assessment and whether or not using a consultation some time ago is appropriate. Well, the intervention powers are designed to deal with, in a sense, the worst cases of systemic or corporate failure by fire authorities. The 2004 Act is framed in this way. Section 21 charges authorities with having regard to the National Fire Framework in carrying out their functions. The Fire Framework itself expects that there shall be proper consultation in relation to service changes. It doesn't seek to specify in detail the means that the consultation would take. But we do expect fire and rescue authorities to work in partnership with their local communities in these matters. The powers under Section 22 of intervention are essentially designed, as I say, to deal with failing authorities as opposed to failures of a particular decision process or a decision in relation to a particular proposal. If you like, it's analogous to the situation that one saw in Haringey with the Baby P case or something of that kind, where there's such a degree of failure that the system isn't operating at all. The situation here doesn't, on the evidence that we have, seem to come into that category. The government intervention in a failing authority is set out in this way in terms of our policy approach. We have set out our expectations that where there are failures with an authority, First of all, the authority, working with its political and professional leadership, will put in place processes to seek improvement. And that should normally be the means of dealing with it. Where that doesn't happen, then the powers under Section 22 of the Secretary of State would be invoked. And these are only used for the most serious of failings. Under those circumstances, the Secretary of State can give certain directions to the authority. That doesn't seem to me, on what I've heard, to be what we as yet have here. The authority has been advised by its professional advisor, the Chief Fire Officer. The decision, not yet taken, is the decision of the members of the Fire Authority, all elected councillors in their area. Like any local authority, a fire and rescue authority must act in terms of Wednesbury reasonableness, as it's termed, in terms of any decision-making which it comes to, and therefore is susceptible to judicial review. And generally, failures of process, failures of consultation tend to be remedied by applications for judicial review rather than the intervention of the Secretary of State in relation to individual decision-making processes. And I just point that out. Whether that is appropriate in this case is not for me to say, because it's not actually for the Secretary of State or his ministers to comment upon the merits or otherwise of a particular application. I'm sure my honourable friend understands that. That's, I think, reinforced by my honourable friend's reference in his speech to the Royal Brompton Hospital case, where judicial review was seen as being the appropriate route. But it doesn't, I think, envisage in Section 22 of the Act that the merits or otherwise of an individual decision should normally be of such a magnitude as to trigger the intervention powers. So, against that background, I've had to say to my honourable friend that it didn't seem to me that intervention under Section 22 is the appropriate route here. It is worth saying a little about the funding of the West Midlands Fire Authority, since my honourable friend made reference to that. And it is fair to say that, like all local authorities, the West Midlands Fire Authority and other fire authorities have had to take their share of our efforts to reduce the deficit. However, taking into account their other sources of funding, their council tax precepts reserves, in addition to formula grant, the overall reduction in spending power of the authority is 5.6% in 2011-12 and 2.2% in 12-13, respectively. That's the same as 9 other single-purpose fire authorities. And whilst, because it is one of the largest authorities, perhaps the largest outside London, in cash terms, the reduction is a large one, the West Midlands also receive the largest protection of all fire and rescue authorities from the floor damping system, which is part of the formula grant mechanism. They receive £5.2 million in 11-12 and 3.58 in 12-13, more than their needs indicators would allocate if the Secretary of State had not applied the damping. Additionally to that, it's worth noting that they receive £27 formula grant per head compared with a Shire average of £20 for formula grant head. So if anyone were to suggest that funding alone was a necessary trigger for these changes, I suggest the figures wouldn't bear that out. That's not my learned friend's contention, but it might be said in other quarters. Additionally, it's worth bearing in mind that the West Midlands have benefited from an 82% increase in capital grant on the previous year to £2.9 million. Now, how they disperse those resources is essentially a matter for them, acting upon the advice of their Chief Fire Officer. I'm sorry if I'm not able to give my honourable friend, therefore, all the detailed assurances that he seeks. We have not generally sought to precisely identify a statutory form of consultation for the reasons I've set out. There are other remedies that best apply there. As yet, I don't see a situation where the authority can be said to have acted in breach of its statutory duties under the Fire Services Act, because action in accordance with the IRMP would, on the face of it, tend to indicate compliance. But, of course, the Minister isn't in the best a position to judge every detail of that case. And similarly, because these are devolved matters to the local authorities, it's not appropriate for the government centrally to advise what the best course of action is. It's right to set out what the legislative framework is, what the remedies are or are not to all those concerned, and the facts as far as they are available to them. So that's why I would urge my honourable friend to continue to raise these issues with the West Midlands Fire Authority. I know he has been in contact on a regular basis with the Chief Officer and with the Chair of the Authority and the other elected members, which of course will include elected members representing the Metropolitan Borough in which his own constituency is. And they are rightly to be held accountable to their electorate for the decisions that they make. And so, whilst I'd say to my honourable friend that the door, of course, is always open, I wouldn't want to raise expectations at this stage that the particular, if I put it this way, ultimate long stop of the statutory intervention power is necessarily the appropriate route in this case. But I do very much hope that the members of the Fire Authority and their advisers will listen to the very carefully and cogently made points that my honourable friend sets out. He makes a reasoned case, particularly in relation to some of the issues which he says about consultation, timing, and the up-to-dateness of information. But ultimately, that, as things stand, has to be a matter for them.
Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.